Hello and welcome back, everyone. Today I'm going to be talking about season one of The Witcher, which is streaming on Netflix. So, um, I haven't reviewed the Witcher books on this channel, but I have read all of the main series of books. I might get around to rereading them at some point. I do want to give them another chance. Not necessarily my favorite books, but there were elements that I really, really did enjoy about them. And so I think that, and I haven't played. I've played like an hour or two of The Witcher 3. I own the game. I just haven't had a chance to play through it yet. Um, but that definitely helped me, and indirectly helped my fiance as we watched this. When it first came out, we watched the show together. Recently, I've rewatched it again. I think I've watched the show for season three, maybe four times already. And I definitely think, as someone who knows the context of the plotting and how time isn't always really what it seems in this first season, really did pay off. Like, knowing the age gaps between these characters and kind of how some of these elements were taking place at different times made the first season make a lot more sense. Um, as to someone who maybe hasn't read the books. So if you haven't watched the show yet, be aware that the three main characters, which is Geralt, Yennefer, and Ciri, they're on different timelines throughout this first season. So be aware of that. That's not necessarily a good or bad thing. I definitely think they could have maybe done a little bit better for people who have not read the books before or played the games. But I think that people could catch on, especially with a rewatch through on what's going on once it's all revealed of what's happening. Um, Positive things, there's a lot of them. I'm probably gonna go into more spoiler discussion. I honestly am really excited. I have watched season two at this point, so I'll be talking about that next. But this is just season one. And if you have not watched The Witcher yet, I really do. If you do like fantasy, I do really recommend it. The show and the world is a bit darker and grittier and more cruel than, I would say, your average fantasy or like superhero type show is. It's very, very like survival of the fittest a lot. And there's my cat. um, and I think that's really well portrayed even within the first like couple minutes of the first episode. So if that's something you're interested in, go watch this show. It's very good. I think season two is really good. Henry Cavill is Geralt. Perfect casting for that role. I think he does an excellent job, and I know he's a huge fan of the series, both the books and the games. And I think that he really brings that love to the role, which just elevates him and all the other performers that are on screen. So super good. You should watch it. I'm gonna go into spoilers though, because one, it's season one. Season one's been out for a couple of years, so hopefully people have watched it by this point. But also because it's hard to really get into the nitty gritty if I can't get into some spoilers. So with that being said, if you don't want any spoilers, thank you for watching up to this point. But let's get into some spoilers. I gotta say that my favorite thing is the fight in Blaviken in the very first episode. That fight scene, just as like a choreographed fight scene, is fantastic. I cannot give that fight scene enough praise. I'm sure a billion people have talked about that by now. It is amazing. It's super well done, and I think it really, like, that fight just, I think, hooked me into the show. It's such a cool design, and it's so smooth that it's so impressive how they do that. The shots are really cool. Everything's really cool in that. I think that's awesome. Um, with season one, I've only read the main books, and I know this is stuff that happens before the first book. Some of it I kind of knew about already, just because of characters talking about it in the main books and like referencing back to it, like the Battle of Sodden and stuff like that is not actually in the first book, but is referenced all the time throughout the entirety of the series. So I knew about this, but I've never read the scenes that it happened in or seen it. And another awesome scene with Yennefer releasing the fire and stuff like that, and just that whole fight through the of the Battle of Sodden is really really good. And I think it's like such a dynamic, like there's so many good dynamic battle scenes and sequences in this first season, and I can't wait to see how they keep progressing through this through all 7 seasons, because I very much trust them that they know what they're doing, and I think that this show will go down as a very very solid piece of art. Um, so I've got so many positive things. I think the third episode is really well done with Yennefer's transformation, her enchantment, and the Striga. That's such a good duality and mirroring of sequencing. I think is amazing. The like so many of the elements that we get to see. I think Yaskier is super funny. I always thought he was great in the books. He's always a fun time. He's a good comic relief character. I think Ciri is probably the most boring in the first season, but that's because she's just running away, because that's kind of, she doesn't have any like combat capabilities at this point. And I think that'll be such a good contrast moving into the series as we progress further and further into the show. I don't think this is necessarily. I mean, I've kind of already talked about this a little bit, but I definitely think that the time sequencing in the show. I think for fans, not a problem at all. But for non-fans, I know that when it first came out, I talked to a lot of people. It was very problematic to their understanding, and I know that pushed a few people out of the show. So I think that could have maybe been done a little bit better, to where it let in just a hint, maybe with like the year. I know there are hints throughout the show. Like there's the in the third episode, there's Foltest as a little kid after Yennefer gets her enchantment, and then him as an older man with Geralt in the same episode. So there are hints that time is a little weird, but I think that if like they're so minor that if people didn't understand what was going on, like if you didn't know that going in, you'd probably be more confused than anything else. Excuse me. The stories definitely feel like little short stories, which I'm pretty sure, I know there's a few books prior, but I think they're more novella length, short story. Please correct me if I'm wrong. But definitely episode by episode felt a little bit more episodic in the middle of this. Obviously the Battle of Sodden was great, and that ties in a lot moving forward. And other elements were, the beginning, I think, was the first episode was really great, and again the whole Yennefer origin story was pretty good. But obviously, like, a lot of the first season felt very much like Geralt doing Witcher stuff more than anything, which is, I think, a good way to introduce people into the characters and into the world, and kind of like make it an easier journey rather than jumping in book one. I definitely kind of wish, as a reader, when I read this series for the first time, that I would have read those first, because I think there's so much good context with all these little stories at play that build into these characters long term that I could have used in the series a bit more, especially up front. But I could see how some people might think it's a little episodic and stuff like that. It's not going to stay that way, I can tell you that. Lots of big story stuff coming up and being set up. So overall, I really, really like this show a lot. I think, I've watched the first season probably like 4 times now. That fight in Blaviken, every time, just so satisfying to watch. And there's just like so many good elements at play here that I am so excited to see where this goes. I really think if you haven't watched it and you do like what I said with like darker, grittier worlds, a bit more um, cruel, I guess I would say. Like the world is definitely not nice to people. There are lots of like people just getting like absolutely, you know, terrible outcomes. It's a bit more. It's a bit more like it's very dark. It's very like it's definitely not for those who are afraid of gore and stuff like that. There's definitely like they have that down on lock, which is very reminiscent of I believe the books too. That it is that darker, more I don't want to say more realistic fantasy, but more like the world is dangerous and these elements are very dangerous and the average person is not safe. So that'll be it for this one, guys. I'm interested to know if other. I mean, I'm interested to know if other people have other opinions on it, or if people liked other elements of the show that I didn't mention in this review. But overall, excited to talk about season 2. Excited to talk about the show moving forward. Super pumped to see where it goes. So I hope you guys enjoyed, and I will see you next time.